Hello and welcome to another episode of the Golden Hour Podcast, brought to you by the Polar Pro Studio. I'm your host, Dave Mays, and today's guest is my good friend Tyler Stalman, at
Hey, Dave.
Stalman on Twitter. Tyler, thanks for coming on, man. This is
I'm
awesome.
glad too. We haven't chatted for a while, so I'm sure there's a lot to be caught up on.
Oh
A lot's
yeah,
happened.
you've been my go-to podcast man recently because I've been really scratching my head on what to do with this show, and you're kind of one of the few people that I can talk to about it who has experience in the podcast world. You've remained consistent. You've been doing it for a while. How long have you been doing your podcast?
So it kind of depends how you measure it, because I basically renamed a show I was doing before. I had a show called Cameras or Whatever, and I eventually just wanted to do something more broad and turned it to the Stallman podcast, where I talk about, whatever it is I want. Sometimes it's movies, sometimes it's photography, or video. But the whole thing has been going for 8 years now, between the two of them.
Amazing.
So, and yeah, and a bunch of stuff is continuous through it. It's like similar guests come back and stuff. So, yeah, it's been a while. Stallman podcast has been about half of that, and the two together is 8 years. So, but I did have a podcast in now I'm having a hard time remembering how years work, but probably 2010 or so. Like right at the beginning, I ran a podcast for about a year that just doesn't exist on the internet anymore because I stopped paying for my hosting service. So unfortunately, that is just lost to time. But I just have to swear that I was doing it a long time ago.
I must acknowledge the fact that we both have been able to run this thing live like real pros. I had my nice little audio intro. You have your wide and tight shot. Talk about that. What do you got going on? You got two cameras shot over there?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a mess. Actually, I was just looking at the wrong lens for it. So right now I've got a 12 millimeter on my C70,
Wow.
and I've got I don't know, something zoomed in. I forget what it's set at on the R5, so I can cut back and forth. And unfortunately, the two don't look exactly the same because you can't output the exact same settings through HDMI. Unfortunately,
It's so
even though it's
odd.
the same brand, similar sensors, you still do end up with different looking colors.
I know, yeah, we were just talking about that. Like here's, you can see the ungraded here in the video, but I'm gonna color grade it throughout the thing so you won't notice. But I
So I'm
don't
going
know
to
what I'm
switch back
doing
and forth a
anymore.
lot to make life hard for you.
Stop it.
Okay, I'll
Exactly.
stop. I'll leave it. I'll leave it.
No,
I'll only switch when
I love
when I have something dramatic to say. I'll punch in.
it. Yes, exactly. It's so epic, man. Your set looks great. Your setup is awesome. I love seeing it
Oh,
in all
thanks.
your videos. Constantly using different angles, different perspectives. I notice like, oh, he's in this corner this time. We're over here. It's like this is kind of the dedicated main set, but it's nice that you
I
can kind of go anywhere in there.
Yeah, I waste a lot of time setting it up from scratch all the time. I mean, it's been on my to-do list for the last 5 years to set up okay, one permanent A-roll and podcast station that just always has a mic and it always has a camera, but I always end up taking it apart and I need this light for this other project. I need the camera for
Yeah.
this. And I just can't bring myself to do it. So I still set up something fresh every single time for some
Wow,
reason.
that's amazing. Yeah, when I was in the home that we were living in, well, we still live there, but the move is kind of we're moving and it's been a mess. So I had to take the sign down, repaint the walls. So I'm in my dad's office right now, utilizing a corner in his room. So very sexy, but it is what it is. Um,
I mean,
so
I honestly, audio quality is all that really matters, and you got that covered. So
oh, of course, I've got the Roadcaster today. So um, I want to start off with talking about the podcast. We already kind of mentioned your history as a podcaster, but I've been going through a little bit of a struggle with figuring out what to do with this show because YouTube and podcasts don't seem to mix all that well unless you're Joe Rogan or a celebrity. Um,
mhm.
and then doing the clips and doing all that work is like a ton of work for a podcast that is often thrown together, and that's the nature of a podcast is that it's very conversational. So I've noticed as I've been editing these clips and stuff, it's a lot of work because I'm often cutting out a lot of chunks to then make a nice, clip. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I could just take out raw clips and not edit it so much. But then it's like, well, at that point, should I just post the whole thing? I know you do live streams sometimes. You often post your entire interview there. Have you
Yeah.
just kind of removed the idea of growing a podcast YouTube channel and it's really just a place to host your show and you see your show more as a audio first kind of thing? Or what are your thoughts on YouTube and podcasting? Because I think there's a lot of ways you can go with it. Having two channels, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's funny that you'd come to me with it because I am constantly changing my mind on it and doing different things. So obviously, I haven't solved it. You know,
Same
if
here.
you want a real solution, talk to H3 or somebody that has really figured out how to crack the code. But I'm in flux with it as well. And to me, I only really started the YouTube channel right at the start of pandemic. It was like, okay, I've been doing this audio for however long. I've got a little extra time in my hands. Why don't I try to make this video? Because I've seen other video podcasts take off. I know some people mostly use YouTube for everything. It's just their generic content platform. So if they're going to listen to somebody speak, they want to be able to do it on YouTube. And I just felt like I want anything I post to be appropriate for the platform. So I don't want to post an audio file that only has a JPEG as a YouTube video. You can do that. It's still
Yeah.
functional like that. I get why people do that, but I didn't want to. You know, I'd like it to kind of be optimized for what it's doing. So
Especially for a
the way I've
niche like
treated it,
I was just gonna say, it's especially for a niche. So many of the people you talk to, so many people that I talk to own great streaming setups, great microphones. It'd be one thing if it was like a different niche where people often don't have cinema cameras they can use as their main camera.
yeah, I mean, I think that's a super common problem for bigger shows that they are constantly just going on Zoom and people are using the built-in mic into their MacBook and not wearing headphones and it sounds terrible, but this is the big show that everybody's really watching. You've got like politicians doing their interview on it, and it's terrible. The good solution to that, by the way, if any enormous shows are listening, like what you should be doing is having people use their iPhone as the microphone and basically like hold it, near here. Like this gives you great audio if you hold an iPhone about 3 or 4 inches away from your face or talk to it like you're talking on the phone. It sounds great. That's such
Yeah,
a high quality microphone. It just needs to get close to you. And I think this is
yeah,
also a lot of the reason that improved MacBook mics are actually a big deal. Like Apple markets them as studio quality and
100%.
pretends you're going to record music. That's not the exciting thing about them. The exciting thing is now your Zoom calls just sound much better. Um, so yeah, but like you said, the niche thing is very helpful. So most people that come on my show already have gear, and it's something that I'm often taking into consideration. Even just booking guests, is like I don't want to trouble anybody that doesn't know how to set this up and that they're going to spend half their day just figuring it out to get it up to the
Yeah.
level of quality I try to aim for. But I would also take, if there's guests that are just have amazing things to say and all they can do is talk into their phone, I would absolutely still be happy to have them on. It's convenient when a lot of people already have a streaming setup. So
I just wanna know that I can be validated in this because I've been racking my brain on, like, should I just break it off into 2 channels and do golden hour clips and then the golden hour channel where you host the main thing? I've it's only been 2 weeks that I've been experimenting with this, like, clips only concept, but,
mhm.
I've been getting a lot of comments from people who were relying on the channel as their source to listen to the full hour and a half long show. Also, my average view duration now has gone down dramatically because I was getting long view
Right.
duration from a low number of viewers, a couple hundred, um, versus potentially thousands with the clips. So it's almost like, okay, should I do the clips separate on a different channel and just go after a completely different audience? And then, I've basically trained the small audience that I have on the main channel. They're already just kind of expecting weekly hour-long shows.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know
Well,
if I'm
one
overthinking all
thing,
this, but
yeah. I mean, of course, we're overthinking it. That's part of the fun of it. But part of the way I've treated it is using the podcast channel as a bit more of a testing ground because it's not my main focus. Which I guess that's part of the question. Maybe is like, is this whether or not this is going to be your primary focus for the next little while? I know you've kind
Mhm.
of jumped around channels a little bit, or like, where will your most attention, like what were your most
Just
time
say
and
it
editing go
just say it
into?
lightly. Yeah,
Well,
exactly. Just say it
I'm just
lightly.
saying, like,
Everyone's fun.
it depends, right? So, if the podcast channel is like, you need this to look super professional, be pristine all the time, then you got to be a little more careful about being reliable and posting in the exact same way all the time. Whereas, since my podcast channel is secondary, like from my
Mhm.
other channel, I let it be more experimental. I'm willing to just, like, I don't know. I've also just done reaction videos on there, or things that are really easy to film and post live, and the expectation of production is non-existent. And so what I've found from that is that the most success I found with the YouTube podcast episodes is when I really treat them the most like a YouTube video. Like, this is basically a YouTube video. There
Mhm.
just happens to be a conversation. Because, like, and the average YouTube viewer doesn't care the form, doesn't care that you think of this as a podcast, because in the end they're
Yeah.
watching a video. They might be watching an hour
Mhm.
long video, they might be watching a 7 minute video, but like, if you can keep them engaged that whole time, then you win. So, I mean, so traditionally, like what I think of as a traditional podcast, there's, sort of two formats of like NPR investigative journalism style, where they sort of do a documentary, or what, we do, what we're doing right now, which is more conversational. And often the topic drifts, right? Like, we probably won't just talk about podcast formats for this whole show. And that's what's harder to connect to a general YouTube audience, because they probably
Exactly.
found you by searching for a single term, and they want you to stick to that topic for the whole conversation. So it
Mhm.
can be an hour and a half, it can be 3 hours, but they want you to generally talk about one thing, unless they follow you
Mhm.
because you're a celebrity. So that's the other solution. You
Well,
can go be a celebrity, and then they'll listen to you about anything. But
first, number 1, be a celebrity. Number 2, as you say all this, I think it's confirming what I was thinking. By the way, I'm loving these switches that you're doing. Thank you for doing this. It's very fun.
I'm trying to keep them tasteful.
Tasteful switches. Everything you were saying about the podcast kind of confirms my thoughts and my theories is that I really should just take each, like, right now we're doing the podcast segment of this interview and then we're going to go on to another topic. Like, I should pull this whole part out and then just have the Tyler Stallman shares his thoughts on podcasts, and then there you go. There's a 10-minute clip
Yeah.
of that one section.
I mean, that's what I should be doing.
I just feel like that's more discoverable and that works with the YouTube algorithm better, right?
Yeah, it depends how you want to treat your channel as well. Like, I've looked at the way other people do this. One group I've been following forever, like since they kind of funny games, which all used to be IGN employees who I followed then. They started the IGN podcasts, which were like some of the first really big video game podcasts 12 years ago, 10 years. I'm not really sure. I
Okay.
can't remember how time works anymore. And they all left their bigger company to start an independent network. So if you go check out their gaming channels, it's treated not like the modern sort of Twitch style of game commentary. It's much more of a traditional podcast thing, where they have shows. And I guess I'm just like
Game
recommending
Scoop
it. So just go like
or
check
like
out. Uh, Game Scoop's the old stuff, and Kind of Funny is what they do now independently. So part of the
gotcha.
thing that they do that I think is interesting is, like, there's a very low bar to posting a video on the channel for them. It's like, look, we'll post full shows, we'll post short reactions, we'll post long play with me episodes. Like, there isn't
Hmm,
this is the format. It's just like, who the hosts are, what their level of quality is going to be, and they're going to experiment within the space and post whatever they think people are going to want to
yeah,
watch. And I think that is kind of appropriate a lot of the time, that you don't need to be completely glued to, like, well, this is a 1 hour show, so I post 1 hour clips. Or, so you could post full episodes and each segment separately. Like, I don't think that's
yeah,
actually crazy, to have duplication of content like that without even starting
okay.
another channel. um, because
That's a
once people start,
that's a big question I
yeah,
had. Yeah,
if people are into it, they're going to figure that out. It's not that hard to kind of navigate. You just make sure that you have playlists for the full episodes, so there's some clarity about, like, how to find
mhm.
which piece of content you're looking for.
I feel like the standard YouTube educator would advise against it because you're having people who may subscribe for the long form who aren't there for the short form. Then you have people
Mhm.
subscribing for the short form who aren't there for the long form. So they skip watching those other videos that they're not there for, which in turn tells YouTube half of your audience doesn't watch your content. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
Um,
I mean, I think of this that what the approach I just mentioned is optimizing for the user and not for YouTube. I
yeah,
think it's a good user experience, and I don't know how YouTube
yeah,
really treats it. If you're not like the thing is,
sure,
it depends if you just like already have success, which the example that I just gave you, kind of funny games or Joe Rogan or if you look at the big or H3, it's not great to look at what they're doing because they already have the numbers. They don't need to worry about getting that
yeah,
extra juice from the algorithm. They've got people are going to show up no matter what. So it's not really about an optimization game for them. Whereas we still need
mhm,
to kind of play that game. And I think that's actually a really common mistake for a lot of people just getting into YouTube, period. Like, let's say you're doing camera reviews and you're like, well, what should I title my videos and what should the thumbnails be? And so people look at Peter McKinnon because he's had the most total views per video. And they don't realize, like, well, he can post completely generic titles and thumbnails because he already has the audience. He's already done all the
yep,
legwork that people trust that whatever he's going to do is going to be interesting. So, like, I'm just going to watch it. And we we most of us don't have that. Most of us need to like fight a new that battle on every single upload. That like we've always got to reestablish the interest, and that's really for anybody that's more in the mid range. So or at lower levels. Like a nice thing about the way YouTube works right now is that like if you're anywhere between small to large medium, you have like an equal opportunity with every video. And I found that with my podcast channel. I really discovered it when I did a reaction video to the C70 that was,
mhm,
just a instant edit. Basically, I just like watched other people's videos and like it was I put out like a short podcast, like 10 minutes of just talking. And it got 40,000
yeah,
views, which is great. And I'd done like a real video that week that I'd put all of the usual time and editing into, like it was fully produced, and it got like 10,000. Like the quick and easy one just destroyed it.
yeah,
And from a much smaller channel. I mean, at the time, I think I had 5,000 subscribers on my podcast channel, whereas my
mm,
normal channel had 300,000. And it's still that the 300,000 subscribers couldn't deliver even a quarter of the views that a tiny subscriber base does. And that's the
yeah,
like equal opportunity that I think YouTube's been pushing for. And it is part of the good thing of the algorithm. I think content creators are often just only angry that an
mhm.
algorithm exists, but it also really can help you find your place. If you don't have an established audience, it can really help you grow from nothing, if you create something that works.
Especially the shorts. Have you been playing around with shorts at all? Have you made any
I have
that
not
popped
made
off?
one yet. No,
I
no, I just haven't even
I
made
just
one. I
started
know
with
from
the
other people's
podcast.
like it's a good idea, but
Yeah, I had a video that I made for the podcast that had 20 views, and then 30 minutes later, I just kinda, like, looked at my analytics, and it went up 2,000 views in 30 minutes.
that's
But
weird.
so the
But
yeah,
great.
very strange. So the algorithm is basically just blasting it out, doing like a those 30 people must have watched the whole thing or something like, "Oh, okay. Well, we've sent it to
Mhm.
50 people, 30 people watched it. So now let's blast it out to 2,000 and see if it takes off." So it's a very interesting game, and I don't know if you listened to Marquez's recent interview, um, with I forget his name, but the TikTok guy. Well, he's a YouTuber, but
Yeah,
it's a
no,
great
no, I haven't yet.
conversation about TikTok, and they talk about that. Like, this is their first time really that YouTube, I think, is a little intimidated because TikTok is really crushing it, and they continue to
100%.
steal eyeballs from YouTube.
Mhm.
I think generally the viewership of YouTube has gone down because of TikTok. It's kind of nuts. So, um, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that form of content? Have you had any thoughts about getting into
Yeah.
that space? I know Anya is probably in it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my wife's been doing it, so I've been doing it with her. So I've been doing it, but not posting it on my own stuff so much. And the format doesn't really connect with me. So this is
Yeah.
this is me showing my age in a way, and it's not me saying that it's not great content. It's an interesting format. I see other people doing great stuff in the space. I don't have great ideas for it very often.
Yeah.
It's not often that something pops in my head like that'd be perfect if it was only 15 seconds long. So much more
Sure.
often I enjoy a long conversation. I just feel like there's more there. Even a 10-minute YouTube video is never enough to explain anything. There's always something left unsaid. So compressing it
Absolutely.
into 30 seconds a minute is challenging for me. So If you're looking for growth, I mean, 100%. Like it's a great place to be. I think that it especially is helpful in like supplementing a more substantial channel. Like
Mhm.
from when I've seen people with enormous TikTok growth and huge followings, it's a bit more challenging to build a business on top of only that. Um,
Yes.
Even if the numbers are lower on YouTube, there's a lot more sponsorship opportunities available. I mean, it's just so much easier to monetize
Mhm.
it, and part of that is that like everything kind of has to be dedicated in a 15-second video. Like it's hard to make something where it's like the first 10 seconds are content, and like and these final 5 seconds are brought to you by Squarespace. Like you can't
That's a good point.
so the whole thing becomes the ad, which is
Mhm.
fine, but very different. And so I just kind of prefer and find it easier to work within like, okay, the content is pretty long and only like 10-20% of it is the marketing message. So
There's lots of companies that you can look at, and obviously hindsight, it's kind of like how did they drop the ball? Obviously, Microsoft owned the market with Skype and somehow dropped it, and now Zoom has taken over. Um, I feel like that could have totally been Skype's game to win at. And Twitter owned Vine and completely dropped it. And I think Twitter had a great opportunity to, grow Vine and invest in it, and yet they shut it down. And like now TikTok is kind of proving that Vine probably could have morphed into something that looked like TikTok, and
absolutely.
it's literally taking over the world. So I've been thinking about that recently, because of Marquez kind of brought up that point, and I think it's interesting to think like, man, Twitter may have been able to to do the same thing. They just didn't have the inspiration or the
Foresight.
the desire
Yeah.
or foresight to do that. But it is interesting how that all panned out. Um, so, anyways, what about your YouTube channel? How's it going? How's the Tyler Stallman channel going? Again, we've
Good.
mentioned Anya, your wife. You guys work together, and she is a full time. Do you want to say influencer? I know people
We
cringe
used
at
to
that
call
word,
it
but
used to be called a blogger. Now, I don't know, content creator. Let's call it. I
so
mean,
you guys stay
influencers
very
like
busy.
it's yeah. I mean, influencers like the word. It's like the industry word, but
Mhm.
it's also a dirty word. Like it. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
It's funny, but yeah. I mean, yeah. That's basically what we do. So, yeah, a lot of the time we're doing, and then also commercial production as well. So we do the same
Mhm.
type of stuff that we do for ourselves for commercial clients. A big example last year is there's a company called Rocky Mountain Soap they've had amazing growth over the last couple of years creating organic soaps and stuff. And so we've been doing all of their campaigns. So that means every couple of months
Cool.
we're shooting something pretty big. And so Anya's doing all of the pre-production on that and casting all the models and dressing all the sets and like basically like everything, preparing it, and then together we shoot it. Where I'm shooting video and she's shooting stills, and then I'll do the editing afterwards. And it's each one is a really big job, and it's been cool. So we've sort of been like taking over most of the content for a company that
Wow.
has been a lot of work. And then we also do it for a variety of other brands and stuff. And sometimes it's pure social. Sometimes we're creating like their actual campaigns. So
Mhm.
it's a pretty big mix of the types of production that we do. But yeah, it's been good.
So you
The
you you actually make your money there's a lot of different things going on personally for the Stallman family. That
Yeah,
Anya's making
absolutely.
stuff, you're making stuff, you've got your own channel, she's
Yeah,
got her thing,
yeah.
you're working for
We've always tried to
clients. It's a
kept our
lot.
in we've always tried to keep our income as diverse as possible. There's if I think of it, there's probably like 5 or 6 different ways that we have income coming in that all count for something. They're not all big. Like an example is stock photography. That's at one point stock photography was my full time thing. Like it was doing so incredibly well that I was able to just like do one shoot a month, and then they would keep
Wow.
selling and I could just relax. Those days are long gone. So now it's like we get a check every month from stuff that we've licensed, but not enormous. And I think it's harder to get to that point these days because the prices have gone down a lot. The market's been kind of flooded, but it is a component that we keep going on the side as well. And then, there's my YouTube and her social and commercial stuff. So, we try to keep it split up as much as possible, because there have been points, especially over COVID years, where certain segments have dipped because things are changing in the economy, and we're able to lean more heavily on some other part of our business.
Yeah, absolutely. But myself and a lot of our niche kind of see you as Tyler Stallman, the YouTuber that does gear reviews, and it's interesting. There's so much more. That's just the tip of the iceberg of what you actually do on a day to day basis.
I mean, I don't
Um,
want to oversell it. Because also, like, it's funny because I always have a bit of self consciousness about how little I post of my um of like creative work, right? Like a lot of other like photography people are posting tons of their their just like artistic photography all the time. Like, oh, I took this shot and I feel like it's beautiful. And for me,
mhm.
it's, what we shoot is really like, I'm saying it's commercial. It's like bars of soap in a bathroom lit well.
Yeah.
And
Uh
so
huh.
I kind of share that to my stories occasionally. I'm like, look at this work we did, but it's it's not kind of the same. So
I was just saying it's good content for you to use as an example of like. So I've been using the R5 professionally. As you talk about it, you got all these great examples of what you've been doing with it. So it all kind of works together.
yeah, and I even think of it that way as an important part of how I review cameras, because some people, Gerald Undone is great at doing extremely technical tests where he will run it through the whole gamut of like, here is where you're going to find the noise resets to better performance at a higher level. And it's hard to discover that on real shoots. So, like, there are the people that are giving that perspective very well. The perspective that I try to come to it through is that, like, I've used this for work, I've used this in a commercial money making environment, and these are the repercussions of using it in your business. So I don't know, that's my little bit of a niche within a niche, I think. So
Well, I, for one, really enjoy your content. I find that we share a very similar brain, it seems, because often a lot of the kind of random hacks that you discover and the things that you share on your channel are things that I've been thinking as well. You've even referenced me in some of your videos. Where like, yeah, there's an issue that I have with this, and Dave did this, or whatever. So
yeah,
it is interesting how we seem to be on
yeah,
like the podcast.
yeah.
I posted my news like I'm doing clips, and then you were like, I've been thinking the same thing. And then even today I said, why don't they put outtakes anymore on
Oh
videos? And
man,
you said, I was thinking of tweeting that yesterday. So it
yeah,
is funny how
absolutely.
we're almost like
I was
brothers
just
from
watching
another
some
mother or
comedies, and
something.
I was like, where are the bloops? Like, obviously they exist. And then I Googled them, and there are bloopers, but they didn't put them in the movie. I don't know. I'm
Weird.
just like, yeah. And somebody somewhere, somebody mentioned Jackie Chan in that. I'm like, yeah, like that's like the
Yeah,
best
Sydney.
example. Imagine a Jackie Chan movie without the outtakes. It's like,
Absolutely.
it's
Those are the
better
best
than the
part.
movie. So yeah,
And then especially Pixar, like, I don't know what movie they stopped doing it, but it was such a thing that every Pixar movie in the early days
right.
would have outtakes during the credit sequence, and it was incredible. I remember all those as a kid,
It'll
and,
come back.
they stopped at some point. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I only thought about it because my kids have been watching, animations, and, we were watching some animation outtakes today, and that's what got me thinking about it. So, um it's fun having kids whenever you get to that point because you start to rediscover all those old movies that you watched as a kid. And I'm getting to shape their childhood the way that I want it to be. It's like, here, watch these movies. These are the movies that I watched.
Yeah,
Not let's not watch this all this new
totally.
stuff. You got to watch
I
the
mean, I
old
remember
stuff.
watching a lot of old black and white movies, or just things being on TV that were obviously like a few decades before my time. Like, for some reason, the Monkeys TV show was in syndication when
Yeah.
I was young, so I watched that quite a bit. And the Adams Family, like in black and white, was on TV all the time. Like, I
Oh, of
watched a
course.
lot of that. But
Uh
that's
huh.
not my generation at all. That's like 20 years earlier. So, but I
Yeah,
like
I
it.
grew up
I like
watching the
that
Three Stooges as well.
now. Yeah, that I still have some nostalgia for something that's older than my generation's nostalgia.
Totally. And I don't know if you saw my tweets, but I did buy a VHS player, and I've been
Oh, no,
using
into
the
that.
actual tapes that my parents gave me.
Wow,
Like,
nice.
so we're watching the old Disney tapes. Like, even though I have Disney Plus, the kids love the physical tape and putting it in the player and hitting play. They've now learned how to kind of push play. The youngest hasn't really figured it out, but um
That's
and
superior analog experience.
the great thing about it too is when the tape's over, it's over. Like, there's no up
Right.
next,
Yeah, it doesn't
So
autoplay. Yeah.
that was the problem with the as a parent, it's like Disney's suggesting, "Hey, do you wanna watch the Spider-Man after this is over?" I'm like, "No, no, no," and the kids are like, "But I wanna watch the," it's awful. So, anyways, um, we do have a main topic today, but before we get to it, I do wanna
Oh.
talk about Final Cut. There's a couple of things about Final Cut that annoy me, and I wanna see if you relate. Number 1 is the waveforms. Like, what is the deal with waveform, on Final Cut? As long as I've been using it for 11 years now, I've been having, like, basically, you have to hit spacebar for the waveform to load. I zoom in to make a cut or whatever, hit spacebar, the video starts playing, and then the waveform hasn't loaded in yet. I still have to pause it, and the waveform loads in after that. Like, I'm using the M1 Max, this is a maxed out M1 Max. I've
Yeah.
got blazing fast SSD speed, and still my waveforms aren't loading in. Have you had this problem? Do you want to
Well,
see this
and let's be
change? Just for
specific. Be specific, because at first I was actually confused. You're talking about audio waveforms, because I was
audio
imagining
waveforms.
visual, like color
Correct.
waveforms like RGB
No,
or
those are
Luma.
fine.
Those are fine. It is that,
Yeah.
yeah, below where you're cutting, it seems like it has to regenerate them every single
Mhm.
time. And yeah, so great example is editing a podcast. It's like you can do a lot of things visually zoomed out all the way, just watching the waveforms, and then you come in and then you come back out and now they're gone. 100%. Yeah, I run into that all the time. I'm sure. I imagine it's one of those, like there's some legacy weirdness hiding in there, the
Yeah.
same way that you find a lot of that in Adobe's usually worse for it than Apple software is, where they just have some cruft that they haven't repaired forever. um,
Yeah.
but it's not my biggest complaint. I have many complaints too, but that one's more like it's a little bit annoying, and clearly
Yeah.
hardware isn't going to fix it. Like, it's a software bug, it's not waiting for faster hardware.
Uh-huh. What's your biggest complaint? I'm curious.
Oh,
What's your
I
biggest
don't have
complaint?
one queued up. I don't have like I'm sure
Give
there's
me 1 or
something
2.
bigger than whatever I'm going to think of first. Um, one that comes to mind. A lot of it is stuff that is present in Resolve, actually. So I'll start with that. Like Premiere, I don't think about it too often, but Resolve is really kind of redefining what I would expect. So, thankfully, the color tools have gotten a lot better in Final Cut. They're still not the same place, but at least you can use it for grading. So I would love for those to continue catching up. A bigger problem, something I would use all the time though, is basically an archive feature where when I'm done editing a project, let's say I've been shooting in 8K RAW, I've got like some very high quality video here, and I'm done. It's been delivered, whole thing is edited in Resolve, which they could do a better job too. But you can say, okay, export this whole timeline, but make sure that each individual clip is saved as its own video file and has handles on either side of it of 1 second or 12 frames or 5 seconds, whatever you want. So you can just output ProRes files, maybe ungraded, of the full quality footage, and just put all that in one folder and stick that folder on a slow hard drive that you put under your bed, and forget about it. With Final Cut, I mean, I just have all these old projects sitting around that are a billion gigabytes. I only need a few clips from it, but there's no way to say like, look, I only need 10% of these files to hold on to forever. I could throw most of it away. So I'd really appreciate an archive function like that.
That's a
Um,
great feature. I didn't know that existed. That is wonderful. I love that.
the way that Resolve treats it isn't primarily as an archive feature. It's the main thing is being able to export everything on your timeline as individual clips. There's a million ways I use that all the time. Like, I'll open Resolve just to do that and export a bunch of stuff and bring it back into Final Cut because it should be
Yeah.
there. It makes a lot of sense.
I was gonna suggest you could technically XML it to resolve, do that, and then bring it back, but it's kind of
It super
silly.
sucks. There's a somebody's going to mention it. There is a software in the Mac App Store that is supposed to do this, and I just found it really actually quite hard to use. So somebody's
Okay.
tried to do it at this point, but I struggled with it and haven't been using it.
That's
And
a great
I
feature
just
that
feel like it should be. And another reason is, as a YouTuber, it's nice to have an archive of B-roll. So it's like, give
yeah.
me all of my iPhone B-roll shots, because I'm going to talk about the iPhone for 10 seconds, but I don't want to go shoot something new for it. And
Mhm.
that's very challenging to build up that archive. So often, really often, I just go to YouTube and I download my old videos and cut
Same
out
here.
this chunk that I need and insert that, and the quality's terrible. Like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
There are better ways, and I'm not doing it.
Well, thankfully, I discovered, Downie, which is in SetApp, and I
Yes.
love that plugin. If you're a Mac user, you don't have to subscribe to SetApp to get it. It's included, but you could also buy it, I think, for 30 bucks.
Yeah,
Downie
I did both.
for
I bought it,
Mac.
and now I'm using it through
Me too.
SetApp. I love Downy. I use it all the time.
It's incredible. You can download up to 4K, which is awesome. It even can do a post processing on it to make it an MP4. It's just a fantastic way to download and rip videos from the internet. I use it constantly. But yeah, that's unfortunately that's what I would do is I would often delete the project and just keep the export on a drive, but then having to go find the drive and find the file was like too many steps, and so I would just rip
Mhm.
it from YouTube and call it a day. So not the best solution. Maybe I could start uploading the raw files to Dropbox, just leaving them there, maybe like a YouTube archive folder, I guess. But
I know a lot of people have solutions. Like people are doing this. The person that really recommended it was Ali Abdal. He was on
mhm.
just a video of mine. I think it wasn't even when he was on the podcast, but yeah, he was like, "Do this, 100% do this. It will save you so much time." And I never did it. So, I mean, I've sort of tried. I just haven't done a good job. Yeah, just building that B-roll archive. I think it's really smart.
Yeah. Well, hopefully somebody at Apple is listening to our archive suggestion and especially the
I
waveform suggestion.
I mean, I think I probably should just do it like, here's all the problems with Final Cut right now video, because I know
I was thinking of
I
doing
know
one.
some Final Cut people watch the channel occasionally. So
Yeah.
bringing some attention to the things that I care about maybe would bump them a little bit forward in the lineup, because I don't know,
Well,
a
I've
lot of them
noticed
don't feel like that big of requests. So
honestly, I feel like in this day and age, like a YouTuber making a complaining video with many people
it's the only way
commenting
to
and
get things done.
agreeing often makes things happen. So let's do it. Let's make it happen. That'd be awesome. Okay, so C70 R5C, two cameras that we both. I haven't played with the R5C, but I'm using the C70 right now. I've been using it as my primary tool and camera for the last um, year and a half now. I think. I love it. It's a wonderful tool. I definitely have some complaints. I'm looking at the monitor right now next to it, and it's kind of hanging off to the side in a not straight angle. It's literally
Oh,
like
the
kind of flopping
monitor.
down.
I can't believe that
I
monitor.
need
It kills me.
I need to send it in because I do have some friends that have sent it in, and they said that it comes back reinforced. So I think the first batch that we all got, who were early adopters, got it as this floppy screen, but I've heard that they replace it with a new screen and it's also reinforced. So they've solved it on a hardware standpoint apparently. So I just need to send
I
it
just
in.
I love this camera. I have so much good to say about it, but I do need to take every opportunity to shame Canon for blowing this. I mean, it's the first Canon that's had any sort of just like really widespread physical defect that's like everybody is experiencing. And the example I keep thinking of is that when I pick up my Canon R, which is I got it on sale too. So it was like less than $2,000, way cheaper camera, and it is still rock
Yeah.
solid after a few years. If you go pick up a Rebel XT or what, like the Canons haven't had
That-
this problem. They know how to build a
yeah.
flip out screen. So I don't know why. Then the other thing that has been a common problem with it is that on the top, on the cold shoe mount, the
Mhm.
screws have come loose for me quite a bit, and they have set up
Oh,
that cold
interesting.
shoe to be a place to put handles. Like they
Mhm.
intentionally designed it so it's like this, look, there's a screw here, so this is where you're going to add a weight bearing attachment that will take all the way to the camera.
Yeah.
And I've continually had those screws just keep like gradually loosening. So I mean,
Really?
maybe my fault
I
for
have
not
not had that
adding some
issue.
Loctite to it, but okay.
I use I use it on an easy rig. So that is literally like a primary location for me to carry it around because I'm using it on an easy
Yeah.
rig often. So I didn't even know that was an issue. I personally have not had that issue. So
Oh
um
well, maybe I'm just bad with my
But
camera.
the overall handling of the like, when you pick up the camera, it feels cheap, and my, cousin who bought this tool that I've been working with, they do courses, Amy and Jordan Demos, I was talking to him about it and how I need to send it in, and he's like, "What do you mean? It's a $5,500 camera." He's a non-cinema guy, he's a photographer, and I was like,
Mhm.
"Yeah, it's kinda weird, it's, like, technically a low-end camera from Canon," and he was, like, mind blown, he's like, "A $5,000 camera is considered low end? What are you talking
Yeah,
about?" You
entry
know?
level, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
there's
an
still
entry
something
level
really
cinema
weird
camera.
about that. Yeah, yeah, if we could talk about C70 for a second.
Please,
It's such a
I would
strange
love to.
camera. Yeah, I mean, 'cause it really is in a place that Canon um, hasn't done this kind of thing before. Like, it is, framed as being somewhat entry level, and I think people that don't own it think of it that way. But in terms of quality and output and what it's creating, I mean, it is often the best choice of camera. Like, it can make sense more than a C500 in a lot of cases, or a C300. Like, it really can be better positioned for so many use cases. And once they add RAW, which is going to be RAW LT, so it'll be a little more compressed than the others can offer, but it's going to just be right on par with them in terms of output. Like,
Totally.
there are so few compromises in terms of image quality in this camera, and it really is doing something that the much more expensive cameras can't even quite manage, and with advantages that are very real. And a good example is the battery life. Like, I don't care what your budget is. If you're doing anything that is like on the go, somewhat documentary style, other than having a full production where it's on a big dolly all day, battery life
Mhm.
does matter. And you can just slap on the BP 30s or whatever the smaller ones are. And two of
Yeah.
those can get me through a whole shoot, which is,
Mhm.
it is not like that with the bigger cameras. And so you're not even gaining a whole lot of image quality, or potentially none. So anyway, I mean, yeah, I think the
That's
raw thing is
fabulous.
going to be enormous, but yeah.
So I've heard kind of rumors, and I'm just saying this from being a forum nerd and just being involved in the forums and stuff, and just kind of hearsay. But I've heard that like it really is an upgrade to the C100 in a way. If you really think about it as a C100 Mark III rather than a C70. I don't know what I think because it's got an R mount
No,
on it. It's
I I
Do
think
you
I
disagree with
think
that
that's
statement?
yeah, I think that's underselling it a lot. I think the C100 was always, it really was an entry level camera. You couldn't create the
Mhm.
same work with the C100 as the more professional line. Like a C100 couldn't compete with a C300, C500, or a C200. Even C200 could blow away the C100. Um, and
Sure.
all of a sudden, the entry level one is on par. Like, you can't tell the difference visually with the final output image. So
Well, it
that's
is the
what's
same
like,
sensor as the
yeah,
300
yeah,
Mark
it's the
III
C300
or whatever,
Mark
right? So,
III. Yeah.
which is a fabulous
I mean, I
sensor,
just love
and
this camera.
what
I'm so excited about the raw thing. I think is going to be huge, because I was shooting on the C200 before, and it was hard for me to give up the raw. Like, the overall image quality is better on the C70 than C200, but there are things you get right. And I don't think you're going to shoot raw. You're all about, you don't even shoot log, so maybe we can talk about that in a second. But
I've been shooting
the
C-Log 2 more often.
oh, okay. What killed me though is that it would lose saturation in overexposed areas, and the best example was blues. So you have a blown out sky, and you want to like bring some of that back in post. The C70 won't recover as much as the C200, and it is the raw format. Like, they're both shooting in C-Log 2. Their sensors are kind of similar. The noise and the shadows is much better on the C70, but still, the highlight color retention is much better. And I think some people get a little bit confused, because they're like, well, there's detail retention in those highlights. Like, it's holding on to as much or more detail, but the saturation's all sucked out of it. Which, when you're looking at a sky, a very common use case for needing to recover detail, you may not need to see detail. You may just need the blue to be able to be pulled back. So I think once we bring the raw color profile back, that's what's going to be the most exciting about it, is that
Cool.
dynamic range at the high end becomes much more useful. So yeah, it's gonna be great.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Well,
wait,
I
if I can critique your taste in color profiles for a second. What
Well,
makes you generally avoid C-Log 2 or use it less often?
well, 2 things. Number 1, this last year in particular, I've been working in an industry that does not notice the difference between 4K 1080 more dynamic range or not. It's been these 3.5 hour long courses that are coming from photographers who are often recording these courses using the built in webcam on their computer. So I'm working in an industry currently with this tool that anything that has depth of field and good audio is already blowing the industry out of the water
Mhm.
in terms of production quality. So because I'm dealing with 10 hours of content that I'm cutting down to 4 hours, and my machine at the time was an M1 Mac Mini. Even just like I just was literally shooting MP4 4K, like not even
Mhm.
10 bit, because I just didn't want to deal with it. And yes, of course, the EM1 Mac handles it well, but once I start stacking 5 layers with motion graphics, with JPEGs, with all these different things, it did begin to chug. And yes, I know it's easy to just throw on a LUT, but having to basically go clip by clip with hundreds of clips for 4 hours was so annoying. So I was like, "You know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna bake it in so that I don't
Yeah.
even have to color grade it when I'm editing." So that's what I
You know
did
what?
is I was
Yeah.
baking it in so I don't have to ever touch it, and I would sometimes adjust things, but, that's why I
Yeah.
chose to shoot
That
YPR.
that is that is completely the right answer. Like that's I mean, that's the reason to do it. And it's because of the computer processing, especially because what I often hear is the argument is like, I don't want to spend the extra time color grading. And it's yeah, again, the one what I really don't understand this with is in terms of C-Log 3. People say all the time, they're like, I rather shoot C-Log 3 because it's easier to grade. Like, how are you grading? Like, are you manually dragging the contrast and saturation sliders every time? Which I
Mhm.
assume they are, because other like what you sh- so the thing is, if you're
Tell us
I'm
what
sure and
tell
I'm
us what we
sure
should do, Tyler.
I sound condescending to somebody out there that is currently shooting C-Log 3.
Uh-huh.
But what you should be doing is finding a phone calls coming back. What you should be
It's
doing
okay.
is finding a quality transform, which there are many of. I mean, there are LUTs. A
Mhm.
lot of people sell LUTs and make them available. And then there's also tools within different software. So unfortunately, Final Cut doesn't have great internal tools. The LUTs built into it are not good enough. I wouldn't use the built-in ones. If you so if you have trouble finding a good transform LUT, Cinematch is another way to do it from the people that make Film Convert. They can match cameras
Mhm.
between each other and also transform to Rec 709. Uh, Better yet, Resolve has all the super powerful tools like color space transform, things like that, where it's like you just tell it, this is what I shot it in, and it just outputs a great 709 transform. And you have all
Yeah.
that flexibility to recover all the extra color data and all of the extra light data from it. Very important. You need to do that those big corrections before in your chain of adjustments. It needs to be before your transform. If you do it after your transform, you're just adjusting a Rec 709 image. Like all the data's gone. It's been turned contrasty. So if you're trying to fix a big white balance change or you're trying to pull your highlights way back, you have to do it before the transform. But there's
Mm.
a ton of ways, pre-built ways that take all the math into account of how to transform these properly, and you should not be doing it yourself. So as long as
Yeah.
you understand that, it is the same to transform C-Log 3, C-Log 1, C-Log 2. You just do the same action and you just select which log profile you
Mhm.
used. So
And it's not a lot of math or processing, in terms of GPU and this and that, like, where you're gonna see
but
issues
it
with your computer
it
is the
it
files
adds
are
up in what you're
big and
doing.
chunky. But yeah,
Yeah.
like the problem was I'm dealing with a reaction based course where I have a primary shot of them talking and then a screen recording of their computer and then a screen recording of the iPad and then on location footage that I shot on the Easy Rig with all these shots and then they'll pause it and then I'll zoom in on it and they'll reference it and they'll draw on the iPad. Like it was very complicated and
Yeah.
it was actually a lot of fun for me to problem solve that, and now I feel like I'm a master at making courses because 'cause I've done 5 of them, 5 or 6 of them over the last year.
Nice.
Just
It's a good
now,
skill to have.
this yeah, exactly. I'm working on it. Uh, I'm This is February, the month we're recording this. Um, I'm now officially freelance again, so I'm continuing to work with them as their primary video shooter, but I'm not an employee of theirs anymore. So, getting back into YouTube, and as a YouTuber in the past, I've often shot in camera as well, especially when I was dealing with other editors. I liked to just kind of bake it in so that they would just kinda take it, and I'd maybe look at it and be like, "Yeah, it looks okay," you know? And then,
Right. Yeah.
um, when I was with Kinotika, the strategy was 2 a week, 2 videos a week, and often I would start at 10 AM, we'd shoot till noon, and then Connor would have it done by 4 o'clock. We'd upload and move on to the next video. So, like, doing an entire
That's a lot.
video in one day, just removing the color grading from that really helped because it was just like, it looks good in camera, bake it in, just ship it, call it a day, you know? Um,
Well, so
so
in my case, I still would choose to use LUTs in that scenario because it probably isn't going to compound the CPU stress enough to be worthwhile to me. And
sure,
that's when it is important. Is like if it starts to slow down your computer, which Final Cut does not deal with LUTs very well. Actually, its LUT implementation is not very smart. Um, so to go back to Final Cut for a second, maybe this is the thing I would change. If you apply it to the clip, right? Like you go to the clip and you say info,
yep,
transform LUT, you like find it in the info panel and you switch it to whatever. That's
or
the
browse and add your
fastest
own.
way for Final Cut to process this. And by the way, this is all coming from, there's like a white paper from the editors of, it was Red Notice? Is that what it's called?
Yeah,
The Netflix show that was edited in Final Cut with The Rock and Ryan Reynolds.
I didn't know I
um,
didn't
they
realize that
they
they
had a big
had Final Cut.
Notion document describing their whole workflow, and they're like, here's how we're going to
Cool.
do everything. And one of the important things was that's the only place to apply LUTs in Final Cut because anywhere else is going to slow it down too much, and all the grading needs to be done afterwards. So when they export it, they strip all the LUTs out.
Hmm,
The way to get good colors out of Final Cut, unfortunately, is not that. Like that's the fast way, but to make it look good, you need to remove that LUT and apply it as a effect, like a LUT effect,
mhm.
and put your
Or the
adjustments
custom LUT
under it.
effect. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
and that slows everything down. So it's like that's what looks better and kind of works
Yeah,
better, but it performs worse. Um,
sure.
so anyway,
When I was
my
doing
workflow for the kind of thing you were doing would just be to do that. I'd use the custom LUT because
sure.
you probably don't have a ton of clips, not a complex edit. Um,
Yeah.
and I
No,
still
yeah,
think you'd
totally.
get a better looking image than the baked in thing.
Of course. And again, we're talking about 4 years ago, and we were shooting on 8-bit cameras as well, so take that into
Right.
account. Sony's color science was pretty terrible back then as well, so S-Log 3 wasn't the best, when I was using that at the time. I started on the 1DC, so that camera did have Canon log, and, that actually looked fantastic on the 1DC. Even though
Right.
Canon log 1 looks pretty terrible on the C70 and on all the modern cinema cameras, Canon log 1 on the original C300, on the C100, and the 1DC actually, in my opinion, looks pretty great, if you know how to color grade it, so
Yeah,
um,
I think
anyways,
Catalog One is nice. It's too bad it loses some highlights, but it the colors are very
yeah.
nice.
It's too bad they don't just include it on every camera. Like, why don't they put it on, like, even the 90D or, like, the lower end cameras? Like, Sony puts S-Log on the RX100, but Canon won't put Canon log on every camera they make. I don't understand.
Well, what was weird to me, I was trying to do a 3 camera setup the other day with the R5, the R, and the C70, and I realized there's no one color profile that is on all of them. The C70 doesn't
Huh.
have C-Log 1. It has C-Log 2 and 3 and not 1.
Oh, wow.
And all of them are missing some
Yeah.
variety. There's nothing that's common to all three. I was like, okay, great.
Yeah. When I
But
was, before I was a YouTuber, I was a director and a freelance DP and stuff, and I actually did work on a documentary feature that my dad's a feature film documentary filmmaker. Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that, but
yeah, I saw something you posted a while ago. You posted a sample of his work.
yeah, and anyways, I was just like, this was back in the C300 days, and I was like, just get all C300s. Like, one guy had a Sony, one guy had a DSLR, one guy had a Panasonic, and he was like, well, we could just use all these cameras, shoot 4K. I'm like, nope, it's it's not the same. Just rent all the same camera. That is the best way to go. And my conversation with Oscar Alva from Jeff Wittick too. That's why they're just all Black Magic. He's like,
Right.
just get all the same cameras. That solves all your
Yeah.
problems. But easier said than done,
And
especially when you're a hybrid shooter like yourself. But
totally, yeah. And as much as possible, the same bodies. Like I was just saying, that you can run
yeah.
into unexpected issues between similar bodies. I'm editing some work
Mhm.
right now that was shot on the C70 and C300 Mark II, and it led to some color mismatch issues. I mean,
Really?
it's been more challenging
Oh,
than I
the Mark
expected.
II.
It was,
The Mark II.
yeah, yeah, and it was a bit
Maybe
of
the Mark III would
the
be
the
better.
settings. It was the gamma settings didn't match. They were both C-Log 2,
Okay.
but one the C300 was using um, like a BT709 as the color gamut,
Yeah.
and the gamma was C-Log 2. So anyway, anybody listening, this is so like in the weeds. I don't know how many people understand
No,
what I'm
it's
talking
okay.
about right now. But C-Log
Yeah,
2 should be shot with Canon Cinema color gamut. Gamma. I
yeah.
always forget which is which because they're almost the same word.
Have you by the
Cine
way,
gamut. That's the
this
one.
may just be my own thing, but have you gone back and looked at any of your, like, 5D Mark II or 5D Mark III footage
Yeah, it's
and been
terrible.
like, "Shit, man." Oh, okay. I feel like the 5D4 in particular, that 4K and the 1DC, it did have a very filmic like, the dynamic range wasn't great, but it had a more film-like look, whereas now I feel like some of the modern cameras are just so focused on dynamic range, it feels a little more digital. I'm probably
I
getting
think
into very objective,
I'm yeah, I think I'm
perspectives.
too focused on dynamic range. So it's like when I see the clipping of those older cameras, I'm just like, it looks like
Mhm.
old digital. So
Okay.
yeah,
But if
I'm
look at some
so
film
used
look at
to.
film. Sometimes film is clipped,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
it's
it's
done
true.
tastefully, but
But it has a yeah,
anyways.
it has a roll off that's a little different. I mean, that yeah, there's two things. Both the clipping, but another one I was really noticing the other day, just comparing the R5 and the C70, was I really don't like the way the blacks just also kind of clip. Like,
Mhm.
excuse me, even if they're not actually clipping, the way that the blacks behave on an R5 is much more like aggressively black. And I mean, this is more an effective C-Log 3, but they just like dip into uneditable much quicker. And there's just this
Interesting.
softness to the roll off in the blacks that you can keep a gentle roll off out of C-Log 2. Like you can make it feel like it's gently
Yeah.
going toward the shadows, and it's just not like that in C-Log 3. You got to kind of shoot some side by sides, and all of a sudden, be like, oh, they are much more different than I realized.
I
And
mean
yeah, I
C-Log
don't know.
2, right? It's not like that in C-Log 2.
Yeah,
Well,
yes,
it
that's right.
remains to be seen how much better, Canon Raw Light is, and I highly anticipate your initial reaction. I would assume to me, that would be
Me
a
too.
classic Tyler Stallman YouTube video, is your opinion and thoughts on Canon Raw Light on the C70. I'm excited to see
I've,
and hear your
I'm
thoughts.
having dreams about it.
Everything else about it is wonderful. I'm not a huge fan of the crop sensor situation, but I understand they're repurposing the C300 sensor. I
So
wish they
okay,
could give me
I think of
crop
it.
sensor
I think of it
lenses.
different than you. Yeah. Well, do you shoot RF on it primarily?
No, I have the turbo booster with the EF lenses, and I never take that adapter off. It's always on.
Yeah, yeah, same here. So, so to me, I often forget that it's cropped because I put like the permanent screws on the adapter, so I actually like can't really
Same
take
here.
it off. So, yeah,
But a lot of people have issues with the flaring with that adapter. There's like a purple kind of flare that happens with it that is hard to unsee once you see it. But um, that's maybe being a little picky, but it is what it is. I wish they would make some crop RF lenses. That'd be nice.
yeah, yeah. Canon needs to work on there. They also need like an APS-C good body, like a pro-ish APS-C body. It's really weird to me that they haven't done this yet. Compared to
Yeah,
like if you want to go all in on Sony, you can get these amazing full frame bodies that like do everything you want, are very competitive with Canon, sometimes better. But you can also pick up a cropped sensor to also have in your bag that's much smaller, using smaller lenses,
mm,
cheaper lenses, or just giving you less depth of field, which sometimes is desirable, or it's offering a variety of options that you don't have with full frame bodies. And you can't
totally.
have that world with Canon. You're just like, well, you're either all full frame or you're buying sort of weird consumer stuff like the M series of cameras.
Yeah,
So I don't know. It's weird.
I don't know. But lo and behold, here we are with the R5C, which if they were to announce that when the C70 came out simultaneously, I feel like as an industry or as a bunch of fans of Canon and cinema cameras be a little more torn. And if we were given the option between the C70 or the R5C, say let's just theoretically say they were both offered at the exact same time, what would you have chosen if you were able to pull the trigger on either a C70 or an R5C?
Yeah, I mean, if I had no cameras right now, God forbid my place burns down and I lose everything and I got to buy it all over again. Um, I would 100% go with what I have right now. I would much rather have the C70 because I've again, anybody doesn't know, I have the C70 and the R5, and that pair has been amazing for me. If I could only get one camera, I mean, stills are important to me. I need to be able to take good stills. So yeah,
Yeah,
I probably would go for the R5C if I could only have one body. But if video is really important to you, like you primarily do video, the ways in which the C70 is a workhorse, like I would absolutely not trade it for the R5C. Now, it's not to say
100%.
bad things about it. I like the R5C, but like the internal NDs are so underrated, which is weird.
I know.
Like I don't know how so many people sort of blow past them. Like, oh, it's missing internal ND. I mean, like, it saves so much time, and also for the way I work, which is I don't know, maybe not as professional as others, it makes the image quality better because the adding a filter onto every lens. Let's assuming you're
Mhm.
using a screw filter, obviously we can talk about the adapter filters in a sec. But if you're screwing on a filter, it is likely dirty. Like
Yeah.
going in and out of your pocket or in and out of a case or just
Mhm.
interacting with your hand, it is so likely to have fingerprint or dust and just extra stuff on it
Totally.
because you also can't leave it on all the time. So it needs to be moving around and having a risk of getting damaged or dirty or whatever. And also just slows down your shooting.
Not to
Then, of
mention
course, you
the
can add, yeah, go on.
yeah, I think you're about to say it, but variable neutral density filters are the more, practical solution because 'cause they're so convenient, but they
Mhm.
often give a color cast that is, a mess, so
Yeah. Yeah, it's visible. I mean, it's not like they're better than there are more good options than there used to be, for sure. I mean,
yeah,
like Polar Pros is really strong. That's kind of my go-to. And yeah, I mean, like I don't really worry about I just kind of use it and I'm like, I'll fix it later, and it's never that bad. But it's
yeah.
not as helpful
No,
as
I do.
internals. Internals are really easy to just
Yeah.
flip on and off, and you just don't think about the color because it handles it. So even Canon's adapter, where let's say you're shooting on EF glass and you put the EF to RF adapter that has NDs built in, there is also some color shift even with that. So
Sorry, I think I cut you off. You were mid rant about going to a mirrorless body over the C70. Was there another point you were going to make that I cut you off
oh
on?
yeah,
Sorry.
well NDs was the first focus. I mean, having built-in like real audio inputs is really significant to me. I mean, this lately I've been going back and forth with the R5 a little bit, which for let's say for a talking head on YouTube, the image quality coming out of an R5 or R5C is actually superior because it is sharper, which I think in a
Yes.
presentational style where it's like you just want clarity of image. You're not looking for cinematics.
Mhm.
Both of the R5s are going to just blow it away. It is better for that. But in terms of simplicity of setup, I don't want an audio interface in between. And usually I'm using XLR mics that need a proper
Mhm.
preamp. The preamps in the R5 series are both mediocre, almost terrible.
Well, we
And
do have
you
the
always
task
need
cam.
extra pieces. And
Yeah, exactly.
anytime you're counting on more accessories and more other batteries, like it becomes less and less professionally functional to me. It's like
Mhm.
before I go to every single shoot, it's like, did I charge everything? Do I have every connection cable in between? Yeah, you were just about to say that Tascam has a interface that you can plug into the accessory. I don't know what they're calling the hot shoe
The hot
now, the
shoe
accessory shoe.
accessory mount. Yeah, accessory shoe. Yeah.
And It's That's good. That's good. I'm glad they're doing that, and it's gonna be very useful, but it's not as good as just having XLR inputs. Like, XLR inputs is way different. It's much better, and physical dials to
Mhm.
adjust the audio levels, and, I mean, just
Totally.
go on and on. I mean, dedicated buttons for zebras and peaking and multiple record buttons, and just, like,
Mhm.
looking at the camera, what else is there on it? A full-size HDMI,
Yes,
you know, th
100%.
like
I'm sitting here with the camera plugged in over AC because it's got a nice AC port in the back that I can just plug straight in. I don't need a battery dongle, a dummy battery that plugs into the wall,
yeah.
or the power delivery over USB, which I think you can do now, but it depends on you got to have the right brick, you got to have the right source to give it actual power. Um, I have a full size HDMI coming out of this thing, and it's just so reliable and great. Um, but then, of course, you have the flip side of obviously the flip screen we've already discussed is awful.
Well,
Um, the autofocus is inferior compared to the eye auto tracking of the mirrorless bodies. And again, just like the flip screen argument, how is it that the same manufacturer that shares the same engineers and shares the same technology, how is it that one of the most valuable, things that makes Canon so great is their amazing dual pixel autofocus technology in the R series cameras? How is it that that's not being carried over automatically to their cinema line? That's kind of a no-brainer. It's like one of their
mhm.
defining features as a company to like include this amazing autofocus system. So
Well, I
it's
actually
just strange.
I got I got some pushback on this in my R5C review, that people were sort of saying I was too generous to the C70 in terms of its autofocus. Have you had real problems with the C70 where you're trying to do something and you just can't accomplish it because the autofocus is falling apart? Because
No.
I
And
haven't much. It usually is delivering for me.
I I am like you. I have not had many situations where it's been bad, but maybe we're a strange community of people who sit behind desks and don't move around very much and are
Yeah.
in well lit
Yeah.
scenarios.
That's the thing. I think the face tracking is excellent. Whenever there is a visible face, the C70 has done great. By the way, if anybody's looking at my video, I'm on manual focus. I don't even know if I'm in focus right now. But it will track the face for A roll type stuff just perfectly. Like, I never have a problem with it.
Mhm.
Better than the C200, by the way, which would often kind of front focus towards my glasses, and the C70 doesn't seem to. But when it falls down is object tracking. It clearly does a worse job of like grabbing onto some
True.
random shape and following it around. That's what the R5 really excels at, and that's the only time it matters to me. So it depends what you're shooting. If you're shooting a lot of like interview style talking head stuff, I don't think there's a significant trade off there.
Yeah. No, totally, and I think that's maybe wise because 'cause I'm always shooting a subject. I'm shooting, my cousins, and so I'm always focusing on their face, or I'm behind a desk doing golden hour and I'm just staying stationary. And the face only tracking comes in handy with this scenario where I have a microphone in front of my face that often would be in focus if you're using a traditional system. It's only
Yeah,
tracking my face, which is wonderful, and I wish all companies had a feature like that. I think it's a wonderful software feature that I don't see why Sony couldn't include something like that, as well. It's a simple, I would imagine, a
I
fair
really
I
like
mean,
it.
of
Yeah,
course, we're talking about engineering and UI and software as if it's like, "Oh, it's easy, just, push a button." But, I think it's interesting that only the cinema line of cameras from Canon have this face-only feature. Uh, does the R5C have that feature in the cinema
it does.
mode?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the cinema mode really brings over almost everything from the C70, except for C-Log 2, and does a
And a
great
crappy
job
flip screen.
of all of it. So yeah. Yeah, I'm glad. So now you need to
What if
set me up to
you
say some
switch
nice
over to
things
the
about the R5C, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm disappointed or something. But
Can you imagine if you switch it over to the cinema mode and then all of a sudden the flip
the
screen
screen
starts
falls
dangling
off.
from the side?
I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, yeah,
Um,
so
no.
R5C,
So
you've had
yeah.
hands-on with it. Obviously, we've set all this up as C70 users and fans. You are a full through and through Canon user. You've got the R5. Obviously, set aside your experience with the fact that, you want the C70 and you want the R5. I would love to hear your thoughts as, a C70 user and a Canon cinema user for so long on this new awesome body. I mean, it's kind of like the ultimate hybrid that I think everybody has been wanting to see. I don't think any company's really ever truly made such a truly hybrid camera. This really is like
Yeah.
the ultimate hybrid that even Sony hasn't really done before. It's really interesting.
Yeah, let's spend a second focusing on nothing but the best features of this, because I mean, there's a lot of good to say about it, and I've been wondering for a while why nobody's really done this. Like, this is 100% hybrid. It is it can take the as good as any other full frame camera on the market. It is completely competitive in terms of photography. It is the top of the line. I know other things want to compete, but it's as good as it gets. And then the
Mhm.
video output is also as good as it gets in certain categories, not in terms of
Sure.
dynamic range, but in terms of sharpness and color performance. Others are also very good. I'm not saying that it's way better than what Sony's doing. There's things that Panasonic does that are competitive in its own way, but
Yeah.
for what it's aiming to, obviously Alexa's doing better in some ways as well.
Of course. Yeah, yeah.
But for what it's doing, it really is top of the line at both photo and video, and that's amazing and something we just haven't had before, where there are very, very few compromises. And I think a lot of people see the big compromise as the lack of ibis. Like that, just speaking of
Sure.
compromises, I think everybody's like, well, they ripped it out, and it's it's some kind of Canon's usual, like they're bringing the hammer down and cutting out important features just to artificially differentiate the market. And I don't think that's the case here at all. They've got two justifications for it. One, I think, is a little like bit of retconning, which is that the stabilization on the R5 is less professional for video because it is never able to fully lock off. Which is not a very common feature. Most cameras with IBIS cannot lock the sensor so that it ever stops vibrating. So even if you turn it off and you have vibrations going on, the sensor is still moving in a way. So the best example of this, Pro AV did a good demo of it, but is when you're mounting your camera to a car, you want the camera to be moving with the same vibrations as the car, so that relative to the camera, the person inside of it is stable. The background is shaking, but that doesn't matter in a car. The background can shake. You want the person to be stable. But if you've got any sort of stabilization on your sensor, it is always trying to adjust to the horizon, to the outdoors, and it can't do a good job.
Yeah.
And that also can go for gimbals. I mean, a gimbal is expecting the sensor to effectively be locked. They obviously they can work well together, but you're not necessarily getting a big advantage of that. And there's also some artifacting that comes from IBIS that is not of the highest professional caliber. So the type
Sure.
of stabilization you get from IBIS is a little more consumer friendly. Like, it looks really, really good at first glance, and it's only after taking a much closer look that you're like, oh wait, something weird is going on there. So
Yeah.
from their perspective, they're targeting the pros. And then the one other justification that I think is a bit more the real reason is to just reduce any potential heat, which of course seems to be reasonable to me. Like, they want this to always
Actually,
be cool,
I
so
didn't
take
even
away the
think about that.
stabilization.
What if it's like a bunch of engineers sat around the table and like, how the heck do we cool this thing down with the R5? And like, well,
Yeah,
the IBIS is creating a ton of heat. If we just got rid of that, put a freaking fan on it, then problem
yeah,
solved. And they're using what you just said previously as the excuse, but at the end of the day, that may be the real reason is the heat, which
sure,
I didn't
yeah.
even consider.
Or just to bring the price down a little bit, keep it $100 cheaper, $200. Like, there are a
Yeah,
variety of reasons, but in the end, um, f- you know, it's not something that has really frustrated me on the C70. Sometimes I wish for it. Absolutely. When I'm just walking around, I wish I could turn on
sure.
a stronger image stabilization other than just the digital, but the digital is shockingly good. And apparently it's better on the i5C. I actually didn't test it, but
Mhm.
it's
Especially
it's
paired with
very
a
good.
IS lens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And again, a lot of pros are using gimbals, they're using easy rigs, they're using tripods, monopods, all that type of stuff. But I still wouldn't, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good enough excuse to get rid of it because, again, there are plenty of other cameras like the A7S III that have really taken over that, and the FX3 that have it, and it works
Mhm.
well. But I think the reasons for it you can kind of excuse away, because at the end of the day, it still is a wonderful hybrid camera. And one of the things that you mentioned, of course, the image quality is great on both. That has, there have been these hybrid cameras like the 1DC, which was one of my favorite cameras, and I got it used for a great price, which is a total flagship DSLR that also did video, but it never had focus peaking. It never had waveforms. It didn't have any
Right.
type of pro video features. It just literally threw Canon log, continuous recording, and 4K on it, and that was it. And this is really remarkable from Canon's perspective. The fact that not only do you get great image quality of video and photo, both as a hybrid, but we truly have, when you go to the cinema mode, a true cinema camera with cinema menus
Mhm.
and waveforms and peaking and all the audio kind of, UI that you would want to see. Then you switch over to photo and you're not using a confusing video menu kind of navigating, like throwing together a photo camera. It really is
Yeah,
the full Canon photo UI, which we've never seen that before. And I wonder if Canon may have started something here with this concept that we may see with Sony, or other things. Sony's
I'm
really
sure, yeah.
been trying to figure out their menu system. I think this new batch of cameras with the A7 IV and the A7S III are way better than they've ever been with their menus. Panasonic has done a pretty good job of kind of blending these two, but I love the idea of like, because as a photographer and as a filmmaker, when you're a hybrid shooter, your mind really is focused on what you're actually doing currently. Like I never was able to fully like shoot video and then at the same time immediately take pictures. It
For
has
sure.
been, as a hybrid shooter, often, okay, we're going to shoot some video. All right, cut. All right, now, let's take some pictures. And my brain is literally going from A to B. It's hard to do both at the same time. So might as well give it two separate UIs. So
Mhm.
I don't know. It's really cool. This really is the actual hybrid tool that everybody has been kind of dying to have. Because in
Yeah.
theory, you could just have this one camera and make a living doing both. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still think the best case for the kind of work we do anyway, so for the commercial work, is to have both. I mean, I would never
Sure.
prefer to be on a set where it's like, oh, I could get rid of one of my cameras and only use the one. It's a better workflow to me for sure to
That's
have
a good point.
this, even if they were both R5Cs. I would rather have this is the photo one and this is the video one. I find it helpful
Sure.
to have that separation in my workflow, but obviously, a lot of people aren't going to buy two big cameras like this, or like you only have a budget for one camera, and so this really does bring it together very, very well.
Yeah, and I mean that's why it's so expensive, right? Is they're probably not making a lot of them. It is a niche market. I mean, cameras in general, professional bodies in general, are declining in sales because of
Mhm.
mobile photography in consumers. So the only people who really are using these tools are professionals. So um, I think people complaining about the fact that it is a hybrid on Twitter and stuff. It's like, hey, like you can still buy the R5 and the C70 and whatever tools you want. I think this is clearly a niche product for a niche market. It kind of sucks that they kind of had to make it because the R5 got so much flack for overheating. Um, but at least we have options.
Well, so I think what's significant about this is with the R5, overheating has just not been a big issue for me. Like, especially using it as a B camera, at least as a secondary camera, it's like
Mhm.
that's not usually my issue. Bigger issue is running into record times. So even if I'm using it for live streaming, I've got to kind of work around that, or like if I'm recording a podcast. I hate the 30-minute record limit. That's more common of an issue for me than the overheat problems. But one thing I love about the R5C is it is always in the best quality mode of the R5. So with the R5, you'd often be switching to, you have to turn it to like the HQ mode to get the full pixel readout from the 8K sensor, where it is properly downsampled as opposed to like binning or whatever it's doing with the additional pixels when you just shoot in the default 4K. So the default 4K
Yeah.
on the Canon R5 is softer, like visibly softer than the HQ mode. With the R5C, it doesn't have any of that softer mode. It is always at maximum quality. You sort of can't make it look worse. You can't
Oh,
make
that's
it
cool.
soft, which is possible on the R5. So that's like kind of one of the nice things is because it's video first. In some ways, it's like look, you're always going to get the best out of this, and you don't need to worry about memorizing weird settings. So with the R5, I have to remember, like, if I'm running it for a long time, I need to go in crop mode to get the full sharp image. That's what I'm doing right now. It's what I'll do for things like
Mhm.
if I'm doing an interview or talking head. It's like, well, crop. If I'm using the crop sensor, it won't overheat, and I'll have the perfect sharpness out of the sensor. So I mean, that's great, but it's still a compromise. And R5C, just don't worry about
Totally.
it.
And again, not to bring back the C70, but that's the beauty of the C70. You turn it on, it always works. It's got all the ports, it's got all the things. You never have to think about it. So yeah, there is no record limit on the R5C, correct? They've
Yeah,
removed that
absolutely none. You
for
could
the stuff.
shoot in 60 frames per second for hours.
Cool. And then I don't know why they didn't put a full size HDMI on it. I feel like that's kind of a no brainer. They should have put that on there, but
Yeah,
it's got the menu,
yeah.
right?
I mean, it should be there. Whatever. Like everyone else is doing it. I bet if you talk to the engineers, they'll give you their reasons. But I definitely wish it was there.
Yeah, Sony's putting it on everything. Even the A7 IV has full size now, which is
Mhm.
interesting. That's kind of more photography camera than the A7S, but they went ahead and threw it on there.
Yeah.
Are they doing the USB webcam thing on the R5C as well as like
I'm gonna
the
bet they are. I didn't look at it, but I'm
yeah
sure it will be
most
there. I'm not
most of
100%
us
sure,
use the
but
boxes or whatever because those features are still kind of
yeah,
buggy. Um,
yeah,
what else? I mean, it's an R5, so you're probably a little bored of it because it's kind of the same. It's just now
yeah.
more reliable.
It was hard for me to get really excited about, even though it's an excellent camera. It's just like, oh yeah, we're in the same place, same images coming out of this. It's not going to look different, but there are you can use it in some different ways. I heard a lot
Mhm.
of people kind of griping about specific features of the raw settings. So, actually, one thing that's really nice, really quick, you can also shoot in like
Yeah.
6.5K cropped raw, which I would
Oh, cool.
use because it's going to be a lot smaller. Um,
Mhm.
but a lot of people were saying that it's a big issue that if you're shooting in 60 frames per second raw, it's going to not be able to deliver power to the lenses, right? That is a problem. I mean, so
Hmm.
you can't use autofocus, you can't even change your aperture. Uh,
Oh,
Not
wow.
great, but because the processor is just taking so much juice from the battery. First of
Interesting.
all, do you have any idea how much space 60 frames per second raw takes up? Like, how many CFast Express cards do you have? Like, what level of production is this? Because if you have a budget for shooting multiple scenes at 60p raw, like this isn't a
8K?
problem for you anymore. You can put a manual. You should have a cinema lens on there because you're spending so much money, and you
Sure.
should have a focus puller using a wireless system. Like, and
Yeah.
it can be worked around still. Like you can still like preset the aperture in a different mode and then jump into 60 and now you're shooting with it, or you can preset the focus
Sure.
or change lenses. I mean, it's just like it's not a very common use case. The files are enormous. Like, they're so big that I do like I don't shoot raw on my R5 at all, like, ever, because it's just so impractical to be only getting what I get, like 20 minutes out of a 256 card, and that's on the light
Mm.
compression. I mean, come on, what, like, how much am I really going to do with that? And it can't, well, sorry, and it doesn't properly support C-Log 2. You can
Uh-huh.
in Resolve extract C-Log 2 out of it, but it's not
It's
properly
obnoxious.
supported because the R5 is
I
not meant to use it. So
I don't I don't like cutting you off, but I did have a great conversation with Brandon Washington. I don't know if you're familiar with him, great creator
yeah,
out in Texas, and he's fully in the red system. He got the V Raptor, he's on the Komodo, and
very
that's one of the
jealous.
things that he said. I know that's one of the things that he said is like, I just spent the money and just made the switch because Red Raw is so good. It just works so well in Final Cut. You get all the raw features, and that's one of the things that we were arguing about is like you go to any other raw system and the files are massive, the support is all over the place, the Canon, especially Canon's raw, is just a mess. You have to like bring it
Yeah,
in and change it to C-Log 2 and this and that, and like I'm so jealous of red. I guess they just have a ton of patents, and I think
yeah, they
that's the
invented a
issue.
lot of this. Yeah,
So, when you get into the red world with the Komodo and now, of course, the V Raptor, like Brandon, I don't know if you listened to the interview, but like he basically says, all my issues with the Komodo, are completely solved with the V Raptor. It's like the best camera I've ever used, full
Yeah,
frame, like it's amazing. So, but we're talking about a $25,000 camera, so it's a
sure.
different
Which I mean, the
different
price.
ball.
I think the price of the V Raptor is actually pretty amazing. Like it's come down and the quality
Yeah,
has gone up, so that's great. I've never been so close to considering a red. Like I don't think it'll be many more years before I have at least a red in my arsenal. But the the thing about the raw, right? Okay, there's two big things. Red, yeah, red has the best raw. First of all, it's got better support than anything else because the second place best comes from Blackmagic. The B raw is
yeah,
amazing. Like the amount of data they fit in a very compressed file is incredible, especially that 12-bit raw coming from the
mhm,
new Ursa camera. I mean, it's like the files are so small for how much is being saved in there, and there's all the flexibility you'd want. Problem is, it is only supported in Resolve.
yeah,
So that red wins on that one. Then when it comes to Canon, Canon has the worst of them. I mean, the files are huge, and then the support in Final Cut, you have no flexibility with the edit. Like all of the goodness about RAW is sort of gone. You're basically just
yeah,
this. It'd be the same as working with like a ProRes 444. How many fours did I say? Four,
yeah.
triple quad
4, 4, 4, 4.
four
4, 4, 4, 4. Yeah,
file.
there's 4 fours.
Yeah, it'd be like, yeah, it's like working with a 12-bit file, but it doesn't feel like working through a raw file because you don't have like a white balance setting, you don't have ISO independence,
Yeah,
you don't have an exposure adjustment, and those perform very differently. And I did a lot of tests with this on the C200. When you're editing them in Resolve and you have those raw controls, it is nothing. It is not similar to be in Final Cut and just like move the yellow in the color wheels to
yeah.
adjust white balance or to just move the mid-tone slider to adjust exposure. The results from raw adjustments in Resolve are completely different and completely better. That is the only appropriate way to be using Canon RAW. Otherwise, you're really just gathering a lot of data and not using any of the quality. So until there's wider spread proper raw support for Canon, I mean, I don't even think about
Is it
shooting
ever
it
gonna
most of
happen?
the time.
The C200's been out for years, and they still haven't
No, yeah,
implemented anything.
I, I have no idea. I really can't understand it. I mean, the only thing I can think of is maybe it's like Apple putting pressure on Canon to adopt ProRes RAW. Like they don't want to
Mm,
have too much. They want Canon. Oh,
uh-oh, we lost battery.
I just killed one of my
Speaking of
batteries.
speaking
Yeah.
of battery life on the R5
Here, I'll just finish the
compared to
idea.
the C70.
But I at least feel like, yeah, Apple would like Canon to feel the pressure of being a third class citizen so that, they realize like, look, until you support ProRes RAW, you're never going to be as
Yeah.
good. I don't know if that's what's going on behind the scenes, but it feels that way.
All that being said, it makes more and more sense why Marquez has been on Red for so long, because it really is the best image quality you can get for a quick turnaround, because
Yeah.
Red does work well in Final Cut, and that's his primary editing software. There's plenty of other tech reviewers that shoot on Red. It's definitely not a practical solution for most people doing YouTube content, but if you want like the highest quality and you want to use the benefits of RAW, Red really is still the only option, and it always has been. I go all the way back to the original Red 1 and the Red Epic and the Red Scarlet, and I have a lot of experience with all those older the MX sensor and stuff like that, and even that long ago, those systems were wonderful, and even in the old Final Cut, I was able to somehow figure it out with the Red 1 original, and, it's almost like because I grew up in the filmmaking world as an editor and shooter in the Red ecosystem, I was like, "Oh, cool, now Blackmagic is doing it, and now all these other companies are doing it." I kind of expected it to be
Mhm.
similar, but even all these years later, nothing has come close to Red's implementation and ease of use and compression. Their compression is so
Yeah.
efficient. You can shoot
Yeah.
8K raw on a 128 gig card and get away with it.
That's the other detail
So,
like that is significant. I think easily overrated when people are just looking at considering the specs is that you can really compress those red files. Like if you set it on the most compressed setting, it's still looking better than like
yeah.
the 10-bit files coming out of C70. You still have more flexibility. You don't
Mhm.
need to shoot at the highest settings at all. So But whereas on the Canon, even if you shoot at the lowest quality, you're still getting bigger files than higher quality red images. So,
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see how this C70 raw light performs. I'm sure it'll be pretty great, and but it's still you're still dealing with all the issues we're talking about here. But um, I think I'm with you on the C70 discussion. Now that I've discussed the R5C and the C70, it does make sense. Like, just buy the C70 as your video tool, and then have whatever other photography tool you want to use, whether it's the original R or R5, R6. R6 is great too.
yeah, yeah.
Just
I've
having those
never
dedicated
been this
tools is best.
satisfied. I've never been this satisfied with the cameras I have ever. Like I've always had this
That's awesome.
like hoping for something else. In
Mhm.
some projects, I do still want a red. I'm like, I would love for the colors to just be perfect. Not that they'd suddenly be perfect, but like there's always this. You can just jump to colors looking as good as they possibly can with either a red or Alexa. And
Mhm.
any other camera brand, including Canon, which I love their colors, there's always a little bit of like, well, I gotta tweak it into something nice.
Yeah.
And red is just instantly there. I mean, the fact that with Canon, for example, that like I had to make LUTs for myself to find a transform that I liked for C-Log 2, because all the default LUTs look pretty bad. Like what Canon manufactures looks bad. That shouldn't be the case.
Yeah.
Whereas with red, you never question it. Like, yeah, use the red transforms. They're amazing. So
Yeah. And they constantly update them, and you can take Red 1 footage shot 10 years ago, apply
yeah,
the new color transform, and now it all of a sudden looks better. Like, it's kinda
totally.
crazy. It really is.
Yeah,
Well, Tyler, thank you so much for coming on the show and nerding out with me. It's just a good
my
excuse to
pleasure.
talk about the things that we think about continuously, and we'll continue to talk about on Twitter with each other, I'm sure. So thank you for coming on.
Well, I appreciate it. I had a lot to get off my chest. So
Let's go play some Wordle. Have you played today?
not today. So don't spoil it.
I haven't either. So let's go do a Wordle together. Sounds good.
All right.
All right, man. Talk to you later.
Later.